thank you all for coming this afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Lee Vjestvang, and I'd like to welcome you to the Innovative Paths to Promotion and Tenure event this afternoon. You may notice that we are down one panelist. Unfortunately, Susan Williams had a last-minute conflict that took her off campus, and she will not be able to be here tonight. So she apologizes for her absence. She did ask that we do our best to identify and solve any problems related to promotion and tenure, and just get those recommendations to her by Monday. So we've got about an hour and 10 minutes to get that done. Actually, the way that I'd like to frame this, and I think we have a very rich conversation to have. I do want to note that if there are particular questions that come up that Susan might be best suited to answer, that we will hold on to those questions and pass those along to her. She is happy to provide either some writing or a short video conversation that would respond to any questions or ideas that came out of this, and we'll get that back to you all shortly after this event. So I'm going to take a moment to introduce our panelists, and then I want to frame up the dialogue a little bit. Then we'll give each of our panelists some time to present from their perspective on the topic. Then I will pitch a few questions and we'll open it up. I think ideally this will be a very rich conversation among all of us in the room. So I'd like to introduce Brian Lauer, who is Associate Professor in the School of Environmental and Natural Resources. He has a Bachelor of Science from Kent State University, a PhD from Virginia Tech. He has been at Ohio State since 2008, and before that was a senior scientist at the U.S. Department of Energy Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. His research is in environmental microbiology and biochemistry. He teaches the Introduction to Environmental Science course with his twin brother, Stephen. And he also teaches environmental biochemistry. He has worked very closely with us on the development of his iTunes U course, the Intro to Environmental Science, which was one of the top 10 courses in the world on iTunes U for a significant amount of time, and received some top billing around that. So we're excited to have Brian. I do try to pull up some interesting facts about panelists that they may not share in their bios. So I'm going to go with my guesses on these, and we'll see whether I'm right. That was your twin brother, Stephen, right?
Yes.
Okay, he looks just like him, so I figured that was probably the case. Jeff Sharp is a professor and director of the School of Environment and Natural Resources. He is also an OSU Extension State Specialist whose research and instructional activities, both formal classroom and outreach-oriented, focus on community, agriculture, and the environment, with particular attention to issues and opportunities at the rural-urban interface in Ohio. He has been here at OSU since '98 and has served as the interim director and now director of the School of Environment and Natural Resources since 2013. I am guessing that he is not also the self-employed lawyer named Jeff Sharp that lives in Columbus. No. He is interested in the local foods movement and the ways in which it affords opportunities for sustainable, safe, nutritional food produced in a socially just fashion. Yes? Okay. Linda Martin is Associate Dean and Director of Academic Programs. She is the Price Chair in Teaching, Learning, and Advising in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. She is also the Director of the Second-Year Transformational Experience Program, the STEP program, in OAA. She became the Associate Dean and Director of Academic Affairs in CFAS in October of 2007. Earned her undergraduate degree in animal science from OSU and MS and PhD degrees in animal breeding and genetics from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University and Colorado State University, respectively. Prior to her current position, Linda served as the Assistant Dean for Academic Programs in the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, following 15 years of teaching and advising at Kansas State University. As of June of this year, she was appointed Director of the STEP Experience in coordination with OAA and the Office of Student Life. In this role, Linda provides leadership for the university's second-year mentoring program that offers students the opportunity to engage in a transformational academic experience, including internship, leadership, service learning, and community service, study abroad, undergraduate research, and artistic or creative endeavors. Students work through their second year with a faculty mentor and are exposed to activities designed to enhance their personal, professional, and academic success. That is also a program that has successfully implemented technology in a number of sections, and we've been happy to be a part of that. She marked her half birthday earlier this month, and is active on Twitter, and based on some of her posts, I am going to guess that she appreciates good food, and is heading to a pumpkin carving event in her college afterwards.
Wow.
All right, so those are our intros. I want to start by talking a little bit about the Office of Academic Affairs academic priorities, which Joe Steinmetz has outlined. And these include these top 6 priorities for the year. So enhancing the undergraduate and graduate student experience, developing the discovery themes, which include energy and environment, food production, and security, health and wellness. Developing e-learning, discussing new models of faculty evaluation and rewards in an interdisciplinary climate, looking at affordability and access for students, and enhancing the arts at Ohio State and within our Columbus arts community. So noting that those 6 areas are really driving the direction of OAA and the work that we're doing, I think the part of what is interesting to me here is the intersection among many of these priorities, including the focus on e-learning and looking at how we can really drive Ohio State to the front of the work that's happening in educational technology nationally in higher education. And then for this conversation, looking at really understanding and moving forwards models of faculty evaluation and reward in the interdisciplinary context as described here, but also really looking at how the work in e-learning plays a part in that. I want to talk for just a minute about ODEE, which is the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning. Our office was developed in 2012 and is really focused on the opportunities that distance education and e-learning provide to lead our university forwards, and looking at the opportunity technology provides us to serve as a land-grant university of the world and to accelerate our community's ability to solve grand challenges. We were originally a smaller part of the Office of the CIO and shifted to become our own unit, and I think that shift reflects a university priority and commitment to looking at how technology can enhance the educational experience of students and prepare them for the world that they will be living and working in when they leave the university. And I'm going to just for a minute go through some of the work that we've done in the past 2 years since we were founded to help move along the work of the university in digital pedagogy and digital content to support student learning. So we've done a significant amount of work in open courses generally, from Coursera to iTunes U. And I'm focusing here for just a minute on iTunes U. So 2 years ago, we had 9 open courses in iTunes U. Now we have actually are pushing up towards 70 open courses. These are the open public courses. In addition to that, we have more than 35 private courses that are being used by faculty who have content they'd like to share through this platform but don't want anyone in the world to be able to access it. So we provide both of those opportunities. These are ways, and Dr. Lauer is going to talk more about how he has leveraged this in his class, so I'll let him explain the opportunities that he's seen. But I think as a department, we see the opportunity for a very strong student experience in an environment like iTunes U that allows us to integrate video, written content, audio, and resources from outside of, from the web or from other publications into a single space that are available anytime, anywhere for student learning, and that also, when open, give us the opportunity to share the academic work happening at the university with learners of all ages and from all backgrounds across the globe, and to engage in some of those conversations that become very cross-generational, cross-cultural, sometimes across languages. And that's been an exciting opportunity for our instructors to learn about their teaching and to gain feedback about that in very different ways. We have, as you can see, very high traffic to these courses. Just last month, we had over 100,000 visitors, 22,000 subscriptions, and over 115,000 downloads. Just as a note, half of the iTunes U visitors that we saw in September came from outside of the US, so a very global community. And for 2 consecutive months, 25% of our visitors came from China. That number has been growing, so that's interesting to look at. One of the other things we do in the Office of Distance Ed and eLearning is provide grants, and those grants are designed to support the work that faculty and staff are doing around education and the ways that technology can support that work. We offer more than $200,000 a year in time and money to faculty and staff who are engaging in this work. The impact since we've started these grants, we've reached over 30,000 students. We have reached 100 faculty and staff recipients and have done a number of conference presentations and journal articles to accompany that work. And I'd like to recognize Rob Griffith's team and the work that Digital Scholarship Group is doing to support the grants that are being provided. So right now we actually have a number of these grants that are open. So just as a heads up for anyone who's looking to find support for work that they're doing, the Departmental Impact Grant we offer 2 times a year. It's up to $15,000 to enhance a large or key course. And the idea there is to increase student engagement and enable anytime, anyplace learning through the purposeful use of technology in a course. We have an eLearning professional development grant. This is designed to support anyone in the university community who is interested in enhancing their work around educational technology. They can get up to $2,000 to do that work. And then the Quality Matters Review course grant supports the training on the Quality Matters peer review process that is available, again, to anyone in the community that would like to participate. Those grants are open now, and you can find information about those or apply by November 3rd if you go to go.osu.edu/IG, which stands for Impact Grants. We're also doing some significant work in the area of digital content creation and digital publication. The book launch program is designed to create a community of digital book authors across the university that engages a faculty cohort who work together for about 6 months. They receive 80 hours of support on digital publishing and design from the Office of Distance Ed and eLearning. They also receive a stipend to cover some copyright licensing and supplies. That work has some of the things that have been developed within our department and in collaboration with some partners. The theater department developed an introductory textbook that serves in the place of what is typically about $125 or $35 book if purchased on Amazon. This is a textbook authored by Ohio State theater faculty. It is used by more than 1,500 students per semester and is available across platforms. It is updated to a new version each semester. And the revenue, which I think, Ashley, in the last year, what was that number? Roughly?
Just this semester, almost 15,000. The last year, we're looking at about 50.
So that revenue goes back to the department. The department uses it to fund graduate research and travel. So it's a great opportunity for them to pull some of those funds into their department to support their graduate students and also drop the cost of the textbook for all of the students in this Intro GE course to $24.99 per book. Weed Science is a book that is in development right now through our book launch program. It's one of 5 in this pilot cohort. It will be publishing in early November. And it is a lab manual for current students. And the plan with this book is to pull the class-specific info out of it and develop a public version for weed identification that will be made available through Extension and will serve as a model for these kinds of projects within Extension going forward. It is an authoring team that consists of 1 faculty member, 1 staff, and 1 student, so a great collaboration there. And as I mentioned, some of the hundreds of Extension publications that are authored through Ohio State's Extension will be able to use this as a template for their work going forward. This book will be free, and all content in it is Creative Commons licensed, which means that it's open and available for others to use as long as they provide attribution to this original piece. Book Launch is a program that is have an application open right now, which closes November 7th. And you can also check out digitalbookstore.osu.edu to see more than 20 titles that have been produced here at Ohio State. Very quickly, the Innovative Spaces program is available to faculty. This is something that allows us to place faculty who are using innovative pedagogy in their courses into rooms that are designed to support that pedagogy. So they have a set of technology in the room, multiple projection screens, flexible seating. And that in this program, this is the first year that we are offering this. We will be selecting faculty, registering them directly into these rooms to teach in the fall of 15. And we will provide training and support, again, in a cohort model to help faculty learn to use active learning methods in classrooms and get them into the spaces to do that. That is also open now through midnight on Halloween, and that is at u.osu.edu/innovative spaces. So those are just, I want to provide some context to the kinds of work that is happening and the support that we are doing our very best to provide across a range of kind of digital educational platforms and models. And if you have questions about any of those things, you can let me know. But I'd like to turn it over now to Brian, who's going to talk about his work in the P&T process. And I'd like to just start by, I want to just kind of frame up where the idea for this event came from. And I was talking to Susan about 6 months ago about kind of how to support this work that I just described, that kind of what we see as a quickly expanding set of faculty work around digital content and pedagogy in the classroom. And she had recently reviewed Brian's dossier for promotion and tenure and referred to it as a very, very strong example of a faculty member who had taken the exemplary work he'd done in this area and not just presented it, but framed it up in a way that actually made it, that set it up very well for success within those first levels of review within his own department. So looking at, she was interested in having a conversation to say, this is not, there are kind of multiple levels to the conversation around innovative paths in promotion and tenure. One of those being the university policy and whether we agree to recognize this work. And once we recognize that work, how can faculty then frame their own scholarship and their own teaching efforts so that they will resonate with their faculty colleagues in the earlier stages of the P&T process. So that's what she described Brian as a very, very strong example of that. And then the idea came of bringing in colleagues from his college and department to be able to talk more about what that looked like in this department and use that as a launching point for a larger discussion about how we can move this forward at the university level. So, Brian, thank you.
Thanks, Lee. So as Lee said, I try to use iTunes U in my class. I have an Introduction to Environmental Science class. I have a director that was really supportive. I'm just not brown-nosing him, but I think it's important if you have a director or a chair of your department that's going to support this work, because if you don't, and I suspect actually I know that that's the case in some areas across campus, that maybe the assistant professor is not going to want to do this. But the reason I wanted to do it is because we wanted to be able to reach these students. A lot of the students are from Asia, and they've explained to me many times that English is a second language for them, so it's nice if they can re-watch my lectures and everything over again, and that's what they can do here. So we set up this course, Introduction to Environmental Science. There's quite a few courses that they can get in Earth Energy and the environment. This is a number of them here. Our course is free, so that's another incentive that they don't have to buy the textbook. The textbooks in environmental science range from $125 to $150, so being free is a good thing. They really like the videos. They really like the interaction. You can film yourself lecturing with the laser pointer, with everything that you write, and they can see all of this again. So I think it's a nice way to present this material to the students. It's nice that it works on Androids. Most of the students, I don't know if most of them, I think a lot of our students have Apple products.
A majority of our students have Apple products.
So it's designed for iPhones and iPads, and that's where it works best. But you can also use your laptops, and I have students that use their laptops. It's just, I guess, not as sexy, but it still functions there, and you can still see everything that we're intended to show you. The reason I like to do this is that you can customize your class materials. A lot of times when you get a textbook, there's some chapters in this textbook I like, some chapters in another textbook I like. With this one, you can customize it and pick just the chapters you like, present those to the students. It will link with audio books, lectures, videos, everything on there. The students can have access to anywhere. They've told me that they like to listen to my lectures double time on their phones between classes, so that's something I didn't anticipate, but I guess they like the audio as well. And again, you can organize everything. They can take notes. They can organize those notes based on your lecture. I think the big selling point is it's free and it's inclusive, so the students feel like you care about them, and I think if they feel that you care about them, I think they're going to do much better in the class itself. And I think the best thing is it just works. So I very rarely have a student tell me that something didn't load, something didn't work. It just works, and I think it prevents students from getting frustrated, and I think that's the nice thing with the Apple products. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Okay, well, I'm supposed to frame a few things. There's some questions we're going to answer here, but I thought a couple of the things I wanted to address is just first, just to acknowledge that Brian in our school is both an exemplary researcher and a teacher, and in the school we value both, and I think his ability to work in both fields has really served him well. So as I look at sort of like how he's successfully advanced through this process, I have to acknowledge that in the school we value both. By way of background, our school of Environment and Natural Resources is what I consider kind of a professional school. We've kind of moved into the environmental science arena just because that's kind of where the fields move, but historically we're a natural resource field. So we trained a lot of people in sort of the practical arts of doing natural resource management. So we're really, I'd say to a large extent at the upper levels, we're spending a lot more time getting our kids out and playing in the dirt. And the wetlands is part of our portfolio, and getting students out doing labs in the field. So just realize that moving in this direction, using this kind of technology, might not be something consistent with what we're trying to do at the 5,000 level with our advanced students. So we really have a balancing act here. But what's amazing is just that we are innovatively trying to do these things in all different contexts. So we have people innovating with technology. We're trying to buy some iPads to get some of our soil scientists so they can go out and sort of like actually walk around with their iPad in hand and do soil mapping. So we're trying to sort of like, as I think about it, not necessarily create a distance portfolio that we're trying to sell around the world or market around the world, but augment our student experience as best we can and realize that technology is a critical ingredient of that. And just because we're using iTunes U here doesn't mean that we're going to use that in every sort of mode. When we're having kids run around on the wetlands, it's like, our bigger issue there is we can't have 20 kids running around on the wetlands. How can we use technology to allow a few of them to run on the wetlands because they'll degrade it, and et cetera. So anyway, the bottom line is we're really focused on how do we maximize the student experience through technology. We've got a healthy culture. So two things that allow for us to pursue this is, one, we've got a healthy culture that really encourages this kind of innovation. I kind of credit one of the reasons Brian went down this path is it was kind of a healthy competition. We have a number of GE courses taught in the school. And it just happened that when we moved a couple new faculty into the school, we located one of the lead professors for one of our other popular GE courses right next door to Brian. And the two kind of interacted. And Brian had just been assigned ENR 2100. And they started to go back and forth. And I think the professor, Joe Donnemeyer, who's an accomplished member of the Academy of Teaching here, and he just recently retired, but he would explain all these techniques and how he really sort of connects with the students. And I think Brian listened to that and said, I can do that with 2100. It's always been a good course, but I can take it to the next level. And they really started to create a really nice rapport. I think that Brian sort of like, he decided he was going to one up his senior professor. And he did go ahead and sort of like innovate with technology. Joe was very committed to sort of doing kind of medium-sized sections. Brian sort of decided he was going to put all his marbles in one basket and really focus on a big lecture. And this augmentation, I think, is perfect for those of us who have seen the big GEs. The rate of students not showing up, the international students you deal with, sort of figuring out a way to reach them effectively, I think, is one of the things as I look at this augmentation is critical. So we have a very supportive culture in that we have many accomplished teachers that are sort of encouraging this kind of thing. The additional thing, and I actually brought it along with me, is this was an 8-year labor on the school's part to revise our AP&T document. There's probably some P&T chairs here or some unit leaders that are aware of this. It's a big task just to update your POA, let alone tackle the AP&T. This started under the director that hired Brian, Jerry Bigham, 8 years ago, started the process of doing this. Jerry did not accomplish the revision of the AP&T document. The new director came in. He sort of moved us along. He did not get it updated. So my first task when I took over this last year was, you know, I'm gonna accomplish what nobody's done in 10 years, and we're gonna update this AP&T document. And what we really did is we looked at it very closely, and we acknowledged that, you know, we value scholarship in a variety of forms, and we explicitly put in language in here that allows us to sort of value a diversity of contributions to our school. So we are research focused, and Brian is in a very research intense lab with one of our eminent scholars, and he's very accomplished in his own right. But we acknowledge that advising, outreach, teaching is important, and we explicitly make that clear in our documents, and we allow for people to provide documentation indicating that's the case. You know, so we do see as a quality indicator, you know, innovative uses of teaching. That's explicitly noted as something we value in our document. That becomes very useful for both the P&T committee and for me as the director when it comes time to write letters and when we have our discussions during the P&T process, is we can look at the candidate's dossier. We have high expectations across all 3 mission areas, but we can sort of say, you know, there's great accomplishment here, there's great accomplishment here, and, you know, there might be even more here, and this is what we value this as, you know, some of those other things. So it allows us to sort of judge our peers, evaluate our peers with a broad sort of understanding of it. And we explicitly have in here some of the language that former Provost Aludo sort of included in terms of what the ebbs and flows of a career and allowing for that. And so it's explicit in there, and we've actually invoked that in some of our deliberations. Additionally, when it comes time for me to write a letter, because I see the bigger picture here of where the school's going, and I see this as a wonderful augmentation of sort of the school, and I respect the individual accomplishments, I can put this in the context of how this contributes to the greater good of the school. And that allows me, by referring the AP&T document and what we value, I can speak to these larger contextual things and sort of acknowledge the accomplishments there. And I've had to actually invoke that. I've done 2 P&T cycles now, and I've had to invoke that in one of my cycles in particular where, you know, I acknowledge that, you know, there's lots of different ways you contribute, and this was an exceptional way. I will caution that in our deliberations that we do become sensitive to what different levels will think of our evaluation. So realize this is what we think at the local level. And I can't tell you, I was frustrated this last cycle that we spent a lot of time worrying about how our college committee would review our local document. Fortunately, my predecessor as director, who started the process of helping get this AP&T document refined, is at the senior level providing guidance to the P&T committee. So I think culturally, at least in CFA, College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences right now, we have a college committee that understands that its role is to look at our AP&T document and make sure that we as a unit appropriately apply the standards we lay out in that document, which is what the college committee is supposed to do. But the stories that accumulate over time within the unit is, this isn't going to fly because I know when so-and-so or what unit looks at this, they're not going to evaluate it properly. So I was a little frustrated this cycle because we spent a lot of time talking about that. It's going to be a cultural change for some of our senior folks to get over the fact that we can justify, as long as we have acceptable standards and we apply them appropriately, we can make the decisions here, and ultimately the college is going to make sure that we apply those rather than sort of provide a second level of judgment. And so culturally at the local level, and I think at the college level, and Susan Williams, having interacted with quite a bit with her over the last 3 years, is very committed to this too. So I think at all these levels we see a tremendous sea change, but it's a challenge, and it's still something we deal with. But I think our school is doing a good job in that. I'll finally note that one of the challenges I see, and it creeps into my annual review process, which is spelled out in the AP&T document, is so I acknowledge that we value this kind of scholarship. It becomes critical for me to sort of begin to document some of that in the annual review letters. And so this last year in particular, I was much more attentive to sort of when they're doing creative things like this, is noting maybe that those are impactful and meaningful and that we have some documentation on it, but going the next step and sort of saying, you're doing something really interesting there. You need to think, and I shared this with a couple of our junior faculty, it's like, you're doing something really innovative. You need to figure out a way to document that impact. It's one thing for you to have it in your dossier, but you need to sort of generate indicators of how it goes. And I might have even put this in Brian's. I mean, Brian has done a wonderful job of documenting this, but there's probably more impact. I think as he moves from associate to full, he's going to have to sort of maybe go the next step. He's accomplished sort of great work here in terms of winning awards for this and getting accolades, but in terms of documenting impact, you know, that's probably someplace that we need better guidance as to how to document the impact. But I'm trying to give our faculty encouragement that, you know, if this is a path that you really are making an impact in, try to document it well. And so at the end of the day, with my annual review letters, I'm trying to incorporate in those cases where it's most meaningful, that kind of information is like, this is great, you know, but you need to sort of like document it. And I do think some of the faculty have actually heard that, and they're excited about going down that path. And I'll say also for some of our senior folks that are at the associate level that maybe have, you know, people's careers go in lots of different ways and they're doing innovative things, that becomes even more important because in our particular context, we do allow for associate professors who've made, you know, they've done impactful research, but if they're really impacting on the teaching side, if they can document that, that's something that we will value. But it's critical that we've got to have a record of documentation there, so when the external reviewers and everybody looks at it, they can sort of see it. So anyway, a merger of culture and then actually bureaucratic, you know, structures allows us to sort of maybe go down this path. And the end result is we have a nice competition where I think, not competition, mentoring would probably be the better term, but it turns into a little bit of competition. It's like, oh, I can do that. You know, you aspire, your aspirational peers. Brian thought he could do what Joe was doing, and now Carrie thinks she can do what Brian's doing, and it sort of like builds a nice culture. And I don't think we're competitive, we're really collaborative in that regard, but it's always nice to sort of like, you know, one up your mentor, I guess. So that's going on too. Anyway, I'll have more during the Q&A.
And I would just like to comment on a couple of things that Jeff said relative to the annual evaluations. That's so important because a lot of times you have change in leadership, a different chair, a different head, a different director. And the communication that might have happened verbally about trying some of these new things might have been very positive, but a new person in that role may see it differently or may not understand your contribution. So I think as a faculty member, it's important to have what you're doing documented, but it's also important to have that as a part of your annual evaluation and written down to kind of know that you're headed in the right direction, and that if you do have a change in leadership, that it doesn't affect you negatively. I'd say the school and where I sit, I have a chance to see a number of different academic departments in terms of documentation that comes forward. And I would say relative to our college, there's a great deal of variability. And a great deal of variability in culture, a great deal of variability in terms of the different requirements and standards. But again, the faculty own that with regard to P&T. So one of the things that I see from my perspective that the school does very well, and well, there's a number of things. One is, and I think probably central to the success of faculty, is they have a strong mentoring program. There's a sense among senior faculty that their role is not just to do what they do well, but also to mentor early career faculty, and they take it very seriously. And the school does a very good job of recognizing and rewarding that mentoring process. And it happens well, they match folks really well, and you see that all the way through in terms of the way that early career faculty have been able to succeed. They also invest in helping kind of those non-traditional interests among faculty related to the different areas, particularly teaching, we're talking about today, but they do a very good job of helping them and investing in them being successful in those different areas. From a college perspective, we try to match what faculty are able to get. For example, a technology grant that they may get at the university level, we try to match that to say, we believe this is a college. We think this is important. We think that as a young faculty member, you're doing great things, and so we want to help invest in that as well. We also try to provide opportunities for our early career faculty or faculty that are interested in trying new things in the classroom. We try to provide them resources to be able to do that and reward and recognize the contributions, not just that they're making to the academic unit, but reward and recognize the contributions that they're making to the college and to their discipline. And I think that's pretty important. In the college, we often have this discussion about how, whoops, wrong direction, about how things count. And you've heard this discussion many times. All these things we do as faculty members, where do we count them in the P&T process? And that always becomes a very important part of the discussion. And I can remember, I've been an administrator a while, but since 1990 when Boyer's book came out, Scholarship Reconsidered, this has been a topic of all the things that we're asked to do as faculty members, and where do we put this into the P&T documentation? In our college, we have extension outreach, but that's a formal part of many of our faculty's appointment. We have teaching, we have research, but our faculty also do undergraduate academic advising and mentoring. And so how do we recognize the contributions of our faculty for these kind of non-traditional roles and or non-traditional modes of instruction, and how do we make sure that it's rewarded and that it counts? And so this discussion has began a long time ago, but as I think, and I also work nationally with some of this, and this is just a summary for you as we think about how to put the teaching piece into the context of the different kinds of scholarship that it contributes to. If you had a chance to look at Brian's dossier, he included teaching in the teaching piece of it, but he also did it in terms of the scholarship part, and he used that thread, and he might want to talk a little bit about that later on, but he didn't just report the number of students and SEI scores. He looked at it holistically in terms of how it contributed to the overall scholarship of what he was doing. And I'll use this as an example. The double stars here, the pieces down the side are the different forms of scholarship that Boyer identified. I just mentioned those. And then we have extension. You might want to substitute that with outreach, but we have extension in our college. So the double stars really indicate, and the Kellogg Commission came out after that and said, well, that's pretty easy. Discovery fits with research, application and engagement, it fits with extension and outreach. And teaching and learning is the scholarship of teaching, and we'll do it that way. But in the college, we've tried to think about it more broadly, and that for every different thing that we do as a faculty member, whether it's research, whether it's outreach, or whether it's teaching, we can contribute to all of those areas of scholarship. And that's really where Brian, I would say, is a standout in terms of the way he was able to capture that, is he thought about all the different areas of scholarship across the different functions for which he was involved. And so as you think about the teaching, I think oftentimes we just think about, okay, it goes in the teaching and learning bucket, but what are the other ways that it contributes relative to scholarship? And we try to work with early career faculty members, and how do you begin to document this? What are the kinds of things that are important? And there's a lot of really good information out there, and how do you start thinking about teaching more than just counting the number of students and reporting the SEI scores? And how do we start thinking about it from a scholarly perspective? And it's not just about transmitting, it's about extending the information, but one step further. And I would say that this is one in terms of thinking about how do we put it up for critical review? How do we make it public? And you start to see some of what Brian has done has really contributed to scholarship in many ways. And so how do we get that? How do we have exchange of that information? How does it contribute to the discipline, the field, and how is it contributing to overall scholarship? And so as we think about evidence of scholarship, we try to work with faculty, and how do you view, for example, your teaching, what it is that you're doing in the classroom from a scholarly perspective. For example, are you creating something new? Is it making a difference within the discipline? How have you shared it? How have you made it public? Has it been up for peer review? And I would say most of the professional societies with which we interact in our college have now an opportunity for faculty to publish, to present in a teaching related kind of section of their professional society. And this is a great opportunity to share some of those things, to have them up for peer review, and to consider those then as the scholarship of teaching. And there are a number of other programs around the country. For example, a couple of institutions who have actually created metrics on here are the ways that you can document these different pieces that you're doing in the classroom, and here's how you can relate it in the whole P&T document. But again, it goes back to a well-written document by a department, by a unit, that clearly specifies how these components of what a faculty member does counts in the overall process. We do faculty advising and mentoring. How does that figure in? And again, a great document that talks about the importance of that, because we know that educating students doesn't just happen with undergraduates and graduate students in the classroom, but it happens many places, and oftentimes the effort and really the creativity happens in conjunction with what's happening in the classroom, but many times in efforts that you're doing that are not, that don't fit in the box like we think of traditional classrooms. In our college, we have we have faculty that work with competition teams and academic competition teams. How do you measure that? How do you count the hours that a faculty member invests? So we try to work with early career faculty to work on documenting some of those things, but it's also really up to the units and the faculty within the units to say, as a faculty, collectively, we embrace this, we think it's important, and we recognize this as a contribution to the scholarship within our disciplines.
Great, thank you. So I want to start with a discussion amongst the panelists, and then we'll open it up shortly for discussion in the larger group. But I do want to note, Susan asked us to share the new core dossier, which is linked here, and there are actually a handful of printouts down on one of the front tables here if anybody is interested. Does anybody want to see one of those right now that we should send up? Okay, so do you see right there, do you mind to hand those back, please? Thank you. And they're not enough for everyone. We hope some would do digital, but please feel free to take and share. And I think part of what Susan was interested in looking at with this is some of the changing language that appears here, and then thinking about how we best support that and apply that across the levels of review in the PNT process. So, for example, in the teaching segment, the language describes curriculum development, teaching, and teaching materials adopted and used both inside and outside of Ohio State. Also talks about research publication both in print and digital formats. I think I want to start by asking you, Brian, because Susan referred specifically to the ways that you use that very limited narrative in the dossier to describe the importance of kind of an impact of the work that you were doing, and also I think to help create an argument that would help your colleagues be able to recognize the value despite maybe a lack of familiarity with the outlets that you were working in. Can you just talk a little bit about how you thought about your dossier and what you think might have contributed as you developed that?
So I wrote down 5 places. So there's really 5 places where I mentioned this. In the biographical narrative, you could really go into quite detail there. Your teaching statement, your curriculum development statement, multimedia, databases, websites, and then funding received for academic work. There's really 5 places where you can highlight this. And I think it's a lot, like if you're submitting a proposal to the NSF, you basically say the same thing over and over again because you know the reviewers aren't going to read the entire document. So I think if you put it in at least 5 places, you're going to get those reviewers at least once because they're looking at all of these, and at least one of these times you can get them. But I think with the biographical narrative, I think is the best way to go into it. And I just explained why I wanted to use it to, if you're teaching a class to a large enrollment, it's hard to connect with the students. And the students let me know that they actually felt connected to me, even though they were watching me on a phone, and it wasn't me. There was some personal connection that it was like I was there teaching them almost. And so there's this anecdotal things that we would put in there and other things like that. But I think if you can just reinforce it over and over again, I think it's the best way to get it across.
Well, Brian, I think one thing, there's another spot, you didn't have it in your dossier, but I think for your next one you probably will, but you know, you can actually have it, this scholarship, I mean, there's probably some researchable, publishable outputs either at teaching conferences or at formal journals that you could get this into too. So there's I think in her case it'll just be a nice topper in terms of like all your other publications to have one of those in there too. So there's other spaces that you didn't even use that are there that could be used as well.
I think what I heard Susan mention too is in addition to the strategy of putting it in multiple places so to ensure that it's encountered by your reviewers, I think she also described what Brian began with as a philosophy of teaching and a commitment to connecting with students that appeared in the original biographical sketch, and then was consistently placed throughout the entire document. And I think she saw that as a very effective way of describing your sort of identity as both as a faculty as a teacher and as a researcher, and how that kind of connected across those areas. So I want to just talk, both of you mentioned this idea of mentoring, which I think is interesting, and I'm guessing that that was, so mentoring / healthy competition, and I'm guessing that those are relationships based on a person's work either as an instructor or as a researcher, not specifically related to the sort of digital elements of that, right? As you are there thoughts you have about the helping kind of coach or develop a peer review process that allows faculty to review each other's work when there is sort of a new progressive pedagogy in place or digital pedagogy that other reviewers may not have familiarity with?
It makes sense. I mean, you know, so in the school, I think Brian's at the front end of like, we probably have one other faculty that's kind of going down this path. He's doing a totally different style of sort of this sort of work, but we have another cohort that are sort of following in Brian's wake, and I mean, it makes sense that eventually they'll workshop amongst themselves and sort of improve it. And I think actually, you know, a couple of the other classes will probably adapt this technology differently, and so I could see some workshopping amongst them, and I think there is, I don't know to what extent it happens. We actually made a commitment this last year. We found so Brian, you got to realize Brian's doing all this stuff kind of like just because he loves it, and it's like I keep saying, Brian, do you need any more help? You know, do you need more help? And he's like, oh, I'm good. I'm working with these undergrad student instructional assistants, and it's like, you know, can you need any help? He broke down this last year and said he needs help. So we found a job classification at Ohio State called Instructional Aids Associate, which is an instructional support position we created that's actually going to coordinate for distance learning. We've created that. She's helping Brian this year. And the idea is that she will sort of like learn his model and be able to go over and work with some of the other folks with helping them sort of move to the same platform. So we've kind of got sort of like, you know, structurally we're doing this. One thing we haven't done so far in terms of mentoring is we haven't even talked about this is Brian's done a lot of this with undergrads being his sort of like chief assistants in the class. We've got to get graduate students following him. We need to figure out a way to sort of get graduate students alongside Brian, helping teach this course or any of these other courses we're doing this, because I think it's going to give them a leg up in the job market to actually have, you know, apprenticed. Increasingly in our fields, it seems like, you know, you can be a great researcher, but if you have that additional teaching embellishment, that could actually set you apart. And we need to get some of our graduate students into this, and we're faltering there. But you know, I think we're trying to build a structure by which this information transitions. Our challenge in some of the units at OSU might be in this case is we've had a huge demographic turnover. So our two or three of our best teachers, most senior best teachers who are members of the academy and whatnot, have retired or departed. And so we're going to be hard pressed to maintain the same quality mentoring, but we'll figure it out, I guess.
I would say some of the other academic units within the college in terms of how they deal with the peer review. Well, first of all, peer review of teaching is part of what we do in the college. So every academic unit has to talk about how they implement peer review of teaching. But the other piece of it is we see, for example, if something's very innovative, we see a lot of academic units sending it out to peers at other institutions for kind of a peer evaluation of what's happening. And that provides another layer of input, but it also creates that validation relative to the peer review of something that folks are doing that might be a little bit more innovative. But for our face-to-face classes, we also have folks that send out their lectures and so forth to be peer-reviewed among the community of scholars that also teach in that area. And that's been really valuable as well. So there are creative ways to get at that, but I think it's pretty important not only for the validation of what you're doing, but for the growth of the individuals to have that kind of interaction and have like-minded folks to sit down and provide some great input.
I am interested in that idea of looking for peer reviewers outside of the university, but I think Susan had mentioned the idea of looking at creating a pool of instructors who are advanced in using progressive digital pedagogy in the classroom and thinking about whether we could do cross-disciplinary reviews to take someone who is doing this work well in one field and send them to be a reviewer of the teaching style or the implementation of the content in a classroom. So I think I will do just one or two questions and then we'll open it. But I'm curious, Jeff, you mentioned the importance of being able to measure the impact of this work, and that maybe being a next step for Brian. And I think across the university, and particularly in the work that we do around technology and education, we're looking very hard at how we measure learning outcomes and measure the developments in student comprehension and retention of information over time based on the intervention of these kinds of methods. Are there, can you talk a little bit more about the opportunities you see for helping kind of this P&T process by figuring out how to better document and measure and report on learning outcomes? Is that, how relevant is that, and thoughts about how we do that?
I don't have the answer. I'll just say, in my unit, we take a very supportive approach to our faculty. I mean, we've hired them, we've vetted them, we're pretty proud and excited about them. We want to see them succeed. And so this is one thing I know, that as I look at people's dossiers and fleshing it out, it's like, we could help you succeed if we could figure out how to help you document what you're doing here. So we have one of our faculty that's very involved. She's got this actual radio program she's been running, about 100 episodes. I mean, Brian's sort of like interacted with her too, but she's done this wonderful media sort of thing. We just don't have good documentation of the impact of that. And it's like, it makes it hard. It's like, you're doing amazing stuff. It's like, we just got to figure out how we can help you sort of like, other people to know this. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have the answer. It's like, what we've used, and I mean, in the case of Brian, it's like we've nominated for awards, and there's different ways you can get sort of like external validation that they're doing a good job, but that doesn't mean they're actually impacting the students. Right. Although when you start looking at the SEIs and the sort of like evaluations and the feedback, we know that it's been having a positive impact. So.
Well, at the college level, we have somebody that works with learning outcomes that works at the programmatic level. Okay. And so we have learning outcomes for every undergraduate degree, we're working toward every graduate degree, but every minor. And now once we get that in place, we've also worked with some faculty of particularly large enrollment courses in terms of measuring the learning outcomes and looking at not from a judging perspective, but how do we know that we're meeting how do we know we're meeting the mark when we're teaching these large enrollment courses, to make sure that we're doing what we say we're doing relative to the whole matrix of the learning outcomes at the beginning, intermediate, and advanced levels. And so we're slowly but surely putting that into place and allowing faculty really at an individual level to decide how they want to use that to improve their course, or how they want to use that in the documentation. But we've very, I'd say, aggressively gone after creating learning outcomes for all programs and really figuring out how each course plays a role in that. But that's really at a different level.
Great, thank you. So let's open it up for questions, and I think you can feel free to question the panelists, or if you want to throw it open for discussion in the room.
Yes, I have two questions. One about the beginning of the presentation to Brian Lowe. I have the impression that the media that you use fit a classroom setting where the students are present simultaneously in here among us. But what you do with iTunes Educator, does this work asynchronous? Can I have people across the globe, all 5 countries? I've done that online, but then in what I have learned is called a correspondence method. It sounds truly old-fashioned. But does this work what you're doing asynchronous? I'm going to download some of that stuff and see what it works. That's my question for you. I have another question. Yeah, measuring learning outcomes, that sounds really nice. But this is my 32nd year, so I've been doing it for a little bit. But the learning outcomes that I actually value are when I just by accident bump into a student I've had 20 years ago. Are we talking about learning outputs here, as in we measure something that's fairly superficial because it's so short term, or are we truly trying to measure learning outcomes over the longer run? So first
So when I first designed it, I just wanted to connect with the students in my class, because the enrollment got so high with 600 students. I wanted to connect with them, but it was a free open course, so as Leave said, there was the vast majority of the students, 28 or 30,000 of them, are from somewhere else. I don't know where they're from. I don't know what kind of connection or what impact they're having. We are, with the help of Jeff and Linda and the other people in the college, we are having a totally online course this summer starting, and I guess we'll be able to tell how effective this type of learning is, because as we teach it now, it's face-to-face and they come into the classroom. This summer it'll just be press the button and go, and it'll be totally e-learning, distance ed, and I guess we'll find out, you know, what the limitations for that are. I think that's probably the best way to find that out.
And just generally, iTunes U is designed, can be used if you direct students through it in a synchronous fashion, but it's designed to be asynchronous, self-paced, when and how fast you want to get to the material. Mm-hmm.
And relative to your learning outcomes question, I'd say that I've been I've been involved with assessment at many different institutions and at different levels of success. And I would say one of the things when we were behind. When I took my position here, we didn't have learning outcomes established for any of our degree programs that had been updated within the previous 15 years. So we really started over from scratch, and we used the quarter to semester conversion to do that. But I would say that these are not, we tried very hard not to get at the superficial, the things that were necessarily easy to measure. We really work with faculty and said, okay, what do you want your graduates, when they go out in the workforce, when they're out in their careers, what should they be able to do? What should this degree, what should they have gained from this degree? And then we said, okay, how are we gonna, what are the measuring points throughout their curriculum that will allow us to gather information on that? We also require internships of our students in most all of our degree programs. All of our students do minors, and so we have some opportunities for gathering some of those higher order kinds of learning outcomes. We also use alumni surveys. We collect information the other way. This is just one way. It's not only, just like SEI scores are one piece of input for you. There are many other ways to evaluate teaching effectiveness, and I would argue that, in fact, with regard to what's happening in the classroom and how we're engaging students and causing them to think about their subject matter, I would say we probably would do a better job of getting at that 5 years out than we would right when that student's walking out the door, because they have a chance to reflect on it, they have a chance to really think about how what they learned in the classroom applies to what they do in their careers. But we try to gather that information too, so that, in addition to everything else, becomes part of the way we look at things.
A little more specific, what indicators are you looking
So
for?
did we,
Measures are not
do
the same
we have,
objectives.
so with our learning assessments, I mean, we have sort of certain indicators. So, you know, we're still recovering from calendar conversion in some regards, but we have these sort of like indicators that we have certain skills that we expect our students to have. And we have sort of like some actual, like, you know, in this class, this test, are we using any of the 2100? I don't remember, is it like first exam, second exam, or something like that? Yeah. We have some indicators that sort of like we expect our students to achieve certain levels of performance. And we're doing that, you know, now what'll happen is when we get enough data accumulated, we can start to look at the sequencing of this. It should be cumulative too, that if we see, well, good performance at, you know, 2100 is a first step in our coursework, although we have a lot of GEs in there, so it becomes a little different. But our goal will be to sort of like, you know, 2100 should inform, 3300 should inform, you know, one of the 4,000 and 5,000 level courses. But we actually have specific exams, specific assignments that are assessed. And you know, we don't have enough data yet, but we should be able to see in time that there should be some connection across the data points. But also, at each of those intervals, we can actually see, I think our data analysis course 2 years ago, if we would have assessed that, would have been horrible. But I think we're doing better in that regard. But again, we've only got a year's worth of data on this. So
Okay.
I think this is a university-wide requirement that we're all moving in this direction at least. But we've got a pretty aggressive matrix that identifies certain checkpoints.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd add to that too is, one that I have to say where is that Randy Smith has asked me to sit on the reaccreditation for the Higher Learning Commission for Ohio State, and the biggest change that he says from this last year's, the last accreditation to this one, is the emphasis on learning outcomes of our students. And I think it's going to be an area, because not all colleges are doing it to this extent, where we're going to struggle to pull that information together across the board. It's something we've identified very early on as something we're going to have to drastically change how we look at as an entire university for that accreditation process. So I think you're going to start to hear more and more about learning outcomes and how they're measured and what we're measuring going forward.
And what we're doing with what we learn. I'm also a Higher Learning Commission
Yeah.
accreditor. And so that's one of the big things when we go into universities and we look at that. It's really are you measuring, are you measuring what you've identified as learning outcomes? And then once you have that information, what are you doing with that information to enhance the curriculum, to improve student learning, those kinds of things. And that's where a lot of times we fall short. We're good at measuring, we're good at summarizing and putting data together, but we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about how do we infuse this into, or how do we use this to make the curriculum better and to enhance learning.
I'll anecdotally toss in one thing here just to tell you where we're kind of moving with some of this stuff. So environmental science attracts a pretty high quality student, and so a lot of students are coming in, they're actually sort of getting credit for 2100 before they get here. So we have a number, we're starting to think that we're having a number of students that are bypassing Brian's class altogether because they're sort of able to test out of it because they've taken the AP class. One of the questions we have, though, is like, are they getting the same sort of quality instruction? And so one of the concerns, so this is where we're going is, what an amazing tool we have now to go out and work with every environmental science, AP environmental science teacher in the state, sort of saying, we have this additional, and we've got ways we can make money off this too. So we have some incentives there, but we really have a need to sort of reach out to those folks and maybe get them up to speed, because we don't know yet, but we have a feeling that some of our students are not getting the training they need to sort of succeed at the next level. They're smart, they figured it out, but we could help them, I guess, move along.
Other questions? Yes.
So I'm kind of interested in the college's philosophy about tenure. That traditionally there's sort of three aspects to what we expect, my understanding of what we expect our faculty to do. It's teaching, and service, and scholarship. And I don't know how to describe that last word anymore. Research of some sort, subject matter. And so I know that you've rewritten your rules to say that you value teaching, but what does that actually mean when the rubber hits the road? Does that mean you have a minimum threshold for all of those three, but then you have to sum up to some quality of a certain measure? Or
well, he can talk about his specific documentation. I'll tell you from a college perspective, and our college is a little different in that we have extension, which is not service. There's extension, which is outreach. There's research. There's teaching, and then there's service. So we kind of have an added layer. Every faculty member that's hired in our college has an appointment that reflects, everyone does service, but everybody else is a reflection of a mix. You might have somebody 100% research. You may have somebody 50% teaching, 50% research. You may have somebody else that's 50% extension and 50% research. So, or 20, 80, 70, 30. There's all different kinds of combinations. So the expectation is really based upon the expectation of your hire and the proportion. I always say that it does it from my perspective because I'm the associate dean on the teaching side of things. I say for teaching, it doesn't matter if you have 10% or 90% teaching. I expect the same level of excellence. You just have less of it if you're a 10% teacher. If you're a 90%, you have more of it. But the level of excellence in terms of what we expect, that if they teach only one class every other year, I want it to be really good. If they teach 3 classes every semester, I want it to be really good. And so we really focus on their appointment and we measure their performance. So for example, number of publications, number of courses taught, all of those expectations are based upon the appointment of the faculty member. And you can talk a little bit about the language.
Yeah. So it's interesting, this becomes a legal document in some regards, so it's like, I become familiar with it, but we do acknowledge explicitly in one sentence that says that we expect excellence in across research, teaching, and outreach or extension. And just the fact that we have them, so I've looked around at some other POAs. I mean, a lot of them will start out, they'll just sort of like, it'll all be research, 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 and then anecdotally they might have a couple sentences later, but we in the single sentence have that. We also have some language in here that suggests that, we expect excellence in there, but we do acknowledge that depending on workloads, responsibilities, assignments, that, you might be achieving, we expect excellence across all 3, let's put it that way, but we accept that sometimes you might achieve greater excellence, and that's not the right word, but I can't find the language right off the bat, but yeah, you might do exceptionally well in this area. And so the fact, I think, just having that we allow for, at least when we are deliberating as a faculty and evaluating folks, the fact that we allow for, we expect excellence here, here, and here, allows us to sort of focus on different things. And I think in some units in our previous document was not so explicit allowing for teaching and outreach, and we actually include citizenship as something we value too. So you know, we now allow for us to evaluate people according to those 3 things, 4 things, kind of equally, just the way we phrase things. So from a legal, you know, it depends. You could take the same document and probably interpret it as like, well, you got to be strong in research. Well, the spirit of our school is we sort of see those 3 as important. We expect high research we have high research standards, and people do well at research-wise, but we do acknowledge that we have some people that are doing well research-wise, but they're doing just amazing on the teaching side, and we acknowledge that.
We also try to say that scholarship extends across all areas. Oftentimes we use, we say scholarship and research and use those words synonymously, but I would argue that scholarship really goes across all, and not all scholarship is research, and not all research is scholarship. Believe me, I've seen some of each. And so we try to start thinking about scholarship really going across all responsibilities and looking at how do we document that scholarship that faculty are engaged in.
We explicitly state here, faculty rule, yada, yada, yada. In evaluating the candidate's qualifications in teaching, scholarship, and service, reasonable flexibility shall be exercised, balancing where the case requires heavier commitments and responsibilities in one area against lighter commitments and responsibilities in another. And we also acknowledge that workloads vary. So, you know, some people are just teaching a lot, and, you know, to expect them to have the same level of teaching or research based on their teaching loads, we allow for some accounting of that. And, you know, sometimes people, particularly at the associate level, people kind of self-select into tracks a little bit. So we allow for that and sort of acknowledge that, you know, that person's really committed to teaching, but we expect them, if they want to go up for promotion, they're still going to have the research, but we'll acknowledge that, you know, they really did well at teaching, and that's considered.
Cindy.
Thank you for this presentation. It was really interesting. It's occurred to me as I was listening to you that we talked a lot about teaching and digital tools and ways of going about delivery of content. But one of the things that I really would like to see at the institution, and it's because I've been hearing about it more across the country, is sort of a toolkit of alt-metrics or alt-analytics for scholarly work and publication that faculty may be able to select from in order to collect information about their impact nationally or globally. I think that might be a really neat toolkit, and I don't see it happening necessarily at the department level because I think it's going to require a bigger effort to do that. There's some of these programs that cost money, for one thing, and also they have to be tailored to specific departments that have values that would be reflected in it. And that's not to say that these metrics programs, these alt metrics or metrics programs, tell the whole story. They don't. But it might relieve some of the burden on faculty as they're approaching tenure promotion to be able to access that information and use it to make a tenure promotion.
So Cindy, I can comment on that a little bit. And I think some of that work is going on in Julie Carpenter-Human's world in putting those systems in place. One of the big challenges in that is identifying you as a faculty member and how you engage in that system with your scholarly work. So the libraries and ODE and OCIO are going to be going forward with a project called ORCID, which is the ORCID ID, which is open source ID for you as a faculty member, so that you're not tied into a publisher's ID like a Thomson Reuters or SciVal or Web of Science, which I think will make a big difference in making that step, especially across disciplines. Because we have some of that data at the very top level, but it's tying the English faculty member in with the Med Center faculty member when all of you use different identifiers as faculty. So it's a big first step is this faculty identification piece.
So do you have a team working on that one?
Yeah, so we've been working with Julie's group and with Mike Payne taking on some different responsibilities in OAA. We're going to move that forward, but like you said, it's money and it's time and it's resources. But
do you have faculty members?
But it's on the list. Yeah, we have a steering committee that's going forward. So
I think faculty would be very interested in that.
What's about opening that data up to you? It's there somewhere, but it's pretty ambiguous right now. What it means. I think the last thing we want to do is open it up and have people misinterpret that data or use that data. Or at least I think that's part of the challenge as well.
Yeah, apart from digital content delivery, do you have any experience or suggestions for using digital technologies in classes that are more discussion-based and or using them for student assignments? And is there a way in which faculty can get credited for that type of work? Because it takes a lot of training of students, right, to teach them how to do digital projects.
People hear the question? No. So the question was, in addition to looking at the production of digital content, are there thoughts about how to measure the use of technology in sort of teaching and learning, not necessarily about the production of content, but about technology tools to support learning? Is that, am I?
Using it for discussion-based classes,
for discussion-based classes,
for actual student assignments. What kind of digital projects can you assign?
So with the class I teach, we do a poster session in the fall where all 700 students present a poster. We're working with ODE and Henry Griffey's here, where we work closely with him. We're putting this together, but we'd like to do a virtual poster session as well with the online summer course, where the students would be able to conduct peer reviews of these posters virtually, would be able to see these posters virtually, and so rather than being here seeing them, that you would be able to have virtual interaction of students using this type of technology. So that's the one way we're trying to incorporate it into our class. We do do a lot with peer reviews because we like to teach them about the peer review process, because this is a GE bio class. And so we do use Buckeye Box for a lot of our students to upload an article that they've written or a poster that they're going to present, and then the students in our class will log on, and then they'll put comments there for the students as well. And again, all of this is done on the computer instead of face-to-face.
So I'd put in just a quick plug. This event is, Innovate 365 is a part of a new sort of series of year-round events that lead up to the annual Innovate conference that we host at Ohio State, and that is a day-long conference that pulls faculty from across Ohio State and the country to talk about their use of innovation, particularly around technology and teaching. And so there are poster sessions and breakouts and keynotes that talk a lot about specifics of how this is happening in the classroom if you're interested in learning more. And that event is May 14th, and all of these events can be tracked on the innovateu.osu.edu website. So I want to just take one moment, and then I think we're going to get ready to wrap up here. But I wanted to just ask in brief if those of you who are in the room have thoughts about things that you feel like would be useful to you to have useful conversations to engage in order to support this work, these pathways within your departments. And I know, looking at you, that you represent a pretty wide array of departments. If there are thoughts about things that you that would support you in that, I'd be interested in hearing what some of those are.
One of the big handicaps that I've run into when it comes to teaching etymology, and I found on the internet some pretty good attempts, but it's digital animation of things. How do I create images of critters and whatever and animate them? And when I always get into a discussion then, well, you need to talk to a programmer and so on, blah, 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 with this. And you know, it always ends up in this endless loop that I you know, we don't get the right connection with the right, as I call them, kids now, who can do this animation. I can come up with the ideas of what I want to visually represent on the screen, but I don't have the technology horsepower to do it.
Right. So, and I'll take note of that as an example of the kind of actual support you need in doing the work of this, of the kind of building technology into your teaching work. What I'm curious to get at now is, we heard some suggestions around mentoring, around taking taking peer review outside of a college to access people who may have more expertise in innovative teaching to do a peer review. Are there other examples of this, of other things that we could be doing or you are seeing happen within your departments that are supporting this kind of innovative pathways to promotion and tenure concept? And if not, that's also instructive because then I think that helps us understand where we can continue to have these conversations. Yeah?
Has anybody looked at, you spend all this time designing the course and then you do the peer review of the actual teaching of the course. Has anybody looked at, tenure promotion on the actual design and building of the course?
You mean
sort of instructional design of the course?
Are you asking, maybe I'm not understanding your question.
Has anybody looked at part of that part of the course?
Oh, I think absolutely as a scholarly endeavor. Now, he may not have done that in his particular dossier, but I think I've seen others do that in terms of innovative teaching approaches, and I think absolutely that's an opportunity.
Yes.
At your college level, do you even bother to distinguish between what might be considered digital scholarship and non-digital scholarship?
We don't, it's all, I mean, in terms of the teaching piece, if I were going to quantify scholarship as it is in the teaching portfolio, it can happen it doesn't have to be in one bucket or another. It's a continuum. We also do mentoring in our college, our undergraduate and graduate, and so that's considered a part of that. I think sometimes when we start separating things out, we don't embrace it as, it's kind of an add-on. And that's why I think if we put that all together and think about how do we reflect really that whole range of what's happening in the college, I think we do a better job of recognizing and rewarding it.
Great. So I think a few of us will stick around for a few minutes afterwards if you'd like to carry on some more personal conversations. But I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll watch for one more Innovate 365 event coming early next calendar year, and then the Innovate Conference May 14th of next year. And thanks again to our panelists so much for joining us.